All systems go. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa, ni hao, jambo, marhaba. It's time for the Armist Inquisition yet again, episode 295 on Sunday, the 10th of September 2023. I'm Phil.
I'm Matt.
And tonight we're very happily joined by Gary Kidgell. How are you doing, Gary? Why can't I hear you? You still there, Gary?
We can see Gary, but we are experiencing some technical difficulties in the podcast. Why is that one red? That's not normally red.
That one?
Yeah.
That's chat box. That's not it. I wonder why we can't hear Gary.
We could hear him.
Just said stand by a minute ago.
Yeah, we could talk to him in the Zoom. Just bear with us whilst we...
Two, one, back. How's your audio, Gary?
Talk to us, Gary.
Hello.
There
we go. Yes.
Am I back?
Yeah, we just needed to unplug, and plug it back in again.
It happened last week, that.
Oh, that's so weird.
But why do it
then?
Then, as soon as we go live and hit record, it decides to crap out.
Wow.
Anyway, there you are. That's the wonders of online streaming.
And it's made Phil all sweaty, so that's
I was already sweaty. I'm now sweatier.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for joining us, Gary. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, guys. How are you?
You really should have mimed. If you'd have started miming, then that would have really got me. So, Gary, you're an author.
I never thought of that. Actually, yeah.
You're an author, researcher. This is your second appearance. I looked on when I was doing our newsletter, and it was 171 last time you came. So it's over 2 years ago now. So
really,
what have you been up to in the intervening 2 years?
I've been helping establish a metaphysical library in Edinburgh called the Alec Johnson Library. Wow. I've also been mentoring others as an astrologer and writing a few more talks. I've yet to decide upon which book to embark upon as my third one. I've made a few notes on different subjects, but nothing, I've not committed to anything as yet. It just hasn't felt right. So I'm stuck on book 2, a bit like one of these bands being stuck on the second album. But hey ho, when the inspiration comes, when the time is right, I will move.
The difficult second album, as it's known.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned some of the talks that you're giving. I was looking. I mentioned in our communications, I was looking through that web page of all the various subjects that because you've been researching this stuff for 40 odd years, and so there's a wealth of different subjects that you've given talks on. And there was one that particularly piqued my interest, and it was this idea of Hercules, the Greek hero, and his relationship to the zodiac, and what that myth sort of means to us as individuals when it comes to spiritual awakening or enlightenment or the soul journey. There's lots of different sort of ways of of describing it. So I was particularly interested in that. So to kick off, could you maybe, because we've all got different sort of, we're all at different levels, aren't we, in our understanding of mythology and the hero's journey and that sort of stuff. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about this Hercules character. Where did he come from? What was his sort of mission? How did he end up? What was the sort of circumstances that led him going onto this quest, these 12 labours?
Yeah, I think I'd like to underpin this with a little bit of metaphysics. In that mythology is a representation of archetypal energies, which form part of a vast evolutionary design. And the symbolism of myth, whatever part of world myth you're looking at, is related to that particular culture. Mythology contains a wisdom of the various cultures who've risen and fallen on our earth, who have sought to understand, access, and to utilize the energies of what Carl Jung described as archetypes or divine ideas. And they portrayed the archetypes through the various gods, mythic characters, and the scenarios into which they were projected in the great mythic tales. Hercules, a classic hero myth, he's the greatest of the Greek heroes. Joseph Campbell, the great 20th century mythographer even, he describes how the heroes of myth respond to what he calls the call to adventure. Something happens in their life which causes them to embark upon their quest. They separate from the rank and file of humanity in pursuit of initiation. Then they return so that they can offer the lessons of their illumination to others as an act of service. Now, the mythic landscape represents the subjective realms of the human psyche, and all the characters found therein reside within us. Now, they represent what we might describe as archetypal psychic components. And myth provides us with a map whereby we may explore, understand, and develop a conscious relationship to these. So there are various characters in myths, including the Hercules one. There are helpful gods and goddesses. There are obstructive gods and goddesses. There are fearsome monsters, arch villains, tempters, temptresses. There are false teachers. There are wise old men, wise old crones. The list goes on. There are divine messengers, beautiful maidens. And these all represent aspects of the human psyche which become particularly active when one undertakes spiritual development. Now, in the case of Hercules, his call to adventure was very extreme. The Greek name Heracles, from which Hercules is taken, means Hera's glory. Hera was the consort of Zeus, the supreme Olympian. They were often quarreling, those two, and that is a symbol of the friction or the difficulties between spirit and matter. And when we tread the spiritual path, it's all about resolving these opposites. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, where we unify spirit and matter, light and dark, male and female, and so on. Now, Hera is often putting obstacles in the way of Hercules, making it difficult. These are symbolic of the challenges we face whilst in physical incarnation. And these are is the realm of the goddess. And in Greek myth, which later became Roman myth, Hera, or Juno in Roman myth, is testing Hercules, whereas Athena, she is a helpful goddess, or Minerva if you go Roman. She provides Hercules with various gifts and assistance. And this is all describing what happens when we undertake spiritual development. There are challenges which arise out of nowhere, but we also gain assistance when we least expect it. So Hercules is driven to the spiritual path, or the call to adventure, after Hera drives him mad. He slays his 3 children and his wife. He seeks redemption, and he is informed that the only way he can expiate his crime is to perform 12 labors at the command of his cousin, King Eurystheus. Eurystheus is symbolic of the personality, Hercules, the hero within. Eurystheus is a coward, basically. After Hercules successfully completes his first labor, he asks his smiths to create a bronze urn into which he can hide as Hercules returns, having successfully completed each labor. And he asks a herald to read out the labors to him. Now, so Hercules then is driven towards completing 12 labors. The traditional order of the labors differs from the order in Alice Bailey's book, The 12 Labors of Hercules. And Alice Bailey has taken the 12 labors to symbolize the challenges presented to the spiritual aspirant through incarnation in each of the 12 zodiacal signs. She's talking about the final stages here of the soul's journey through matter, what the wisdom teachings would call leading to initiation and eventually liberation from the wheel of rebirth. I think it's important for me to mention that whilst Bailey, in her book, indicates that Hercules then attains transcendence upon completing his 12 labors, that is not the case in the traditional version. He goes on to help Jason and the Argonauts on their quest, and eventually, at the end of his life, he mounts a funeral pyre, and the myth goes that his physical body is consumed and he ascends to the Olympian realms to marry Hebe. And that is all about what the wisdom teachings call the burning ground of initiation, where at a very advanced stage of spiritual development, one has drawn the energies of the soul, or what we call solar fire, into the aura. This has evoked the energies of spirit, electric fire, and this coaxes the Kundalini serpent up the spine to meet its mate in the Sahasrara chakra. That we're talking about transformation, transmutation through spiritual fire. Again, symbols of myth can be interpreted in different ways, but you can perhaps see how I'm relating my psyche, my study of the wisdom teachings, to this particular myth. But it's important when we interpret myth that we're aware that the symbols have different layers of meaning, and what the same symbol can have different meaning to the person who perceives it. This is important to bear in mind. As an example, in one of his labors, perhaps the most challenging, Hercules has to overcome the Hydra, this foul 9-headed monster that resides within a swamp. That symbols the depths of one's psyche and all what the Freudian id, the Jungian shadow, the darkest desires, etc., that have accumulated over many lives. But my Hydra, what I've got to face, would be different from Matt's, would be different from Phil's, because we each have an existential psyche.
You don't want to see my Hydra, Gary.
You don't want to know about mine either.
Sorry, go on. I couldn't resist.
No, absolutely. It's nice when it's light-hearted, but so he's got to perform these 12 labours. I'll do them in the Alice Bailey order
Right.
because she's considering them in terms of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Now, before Hercules begins his labours, he's given various gifts by the Olympian gods. He's given a robe from Athena or Minerva, if you do the Roman. That's a symbol of his vocation. He receives a sword from Hermes or Mercury, a symbol of the ability to discriminate. Poseidon or Neptune gives him horses, symbolizing the capacity to cope with the forces of the unconscious. Hephaestus or Vulcan gives him a golden breastplate, bows and arrows from Apollo. But despite this wondrous array of gifts, Hercules wants to bludgeon his way ahead with his tried and trusty club. And this is symbolic of the fact that we have these spiritual faculties within us that we can access and which can greatly assist us in our spiritual development. And that is what we should be doing through our spiritual disciplines, our meditation and contemplation, our study, our acts of service to humanity, rather than just plodding on with what we have known in the past, because we are effecting a complete transformation here. So if I begin with the labours then, the one that relates to the sign of Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, is the mares of Diomedes. King Diomedes is a tyrant. He possesses these man-eating horses, and he feeds unsuspecting guests to these horses. Pretty gruesome stuff. I'm giving a potted version here, but Hercules basically tames the mares and feeds Diomedes to his own horses. Now, Aries is the sign of mind control and leadership. We say that Aries should function like a fountain of ideas, new ideas which benefit humanity. And in this particular labor, it's all about controlling the mind, which is why we meditate and undertake spiritual disciplines. In the Hindu teachings, you have the symbol of the Katha Upanishad with the horses pulling the chariot. The owner of the chariot is the immortal aspect of our being, and the horses relate to our instincts and desires, and the reins relate to our thoughts. And to become an effective charioteer, we must control our thoughts and then bring the horses under control, because when we tread the path, it's all about freeing the mind from the desires. The Hindus talk of karma manas, mind contaminated by desire, and it's a challenge for us to do that, but it's a very important victory if we can. Similarly, we have the Buddhist symbol of the chattering monkey, the way that the mind just forms one thought after another, like a monkey leaping around in the jungle from one branch to another. And the mind will assume images, forms and colors of everything presented to it. It can be via our five senses, it can be our imagination, our emotions, our memory. And when we meditate, we're stilling that down, we're calming the mind, so that this constant chatter can end, so we can then hear the inner voice of the soul. So that's the man-eating mares.
So what was his tactic for capturing the man-eating mares?
Well, he basically did it through force of will.
Right, and the intellect.
He actually had a companion called Abderus, and he was left in charge of the mares while Hercules had to fight the soldiers of the island. And Abderus was actually devoured by the mares. That's a symbol of one who is not attuned to the soul and can't control the lower mind, and one's spiritual potential is then devoured. Whereas King Diomedes, again, when we have control of the man-eating mares, he is effectively devoured. That's simply the lower levels of the psyche, someone functioning in a desire-driven way. I mean, this is abstract symbolism, of course, but I hope you can see where I'm coming from.
Absolutely, yeah. The tyrant ends up being devoured by his own horses, his own shadow, if you like, as Jung would.
I mean, there's also a nice allusion to the law of karma there, in terms of what you give out, you get back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And Labor 2, Hercules must capture this bull on the island of Crete and then transport it to the mainland.
This has got to be Taurus, surely, Gary. It's got to be Taurus.
Yeah, I should have said that, actually. My apologies. Yes, right. Absolutely.
That's 1 point.
And I mean, this is all about focusing our energies towards spiritual things and overcoming our desires and our attachments. And the bull is a symbol of the lower nature in general, and especially our attachments. And Taurus is the sign of the zodiac that is the most physical. And it's a great challenge if the soul incarnates in Taurus to overcome attachments. They tend to be, spiritual Taurians tend to be placed in situations where they have to free themselves because it's part of the challenge. And in this labor, Hercules controls the bull and takes it across to the mainland. That's symbolic of the fact that when we tread the path, we realize we're part of humanity and ultimately part of the one divine life. We don't function at a level of psychological separation driven by the emotions in the lower mind. We don't view ourselves as an isolated, self-sufficient entity. That's the island. But rather, we seek this state of unity. It's an interesting symbol, this one. I also think, quite abstractly, there are parallels with King Arthur taking the sword from the stone. Right. The sword is the symbol of the personality. And if we can refine the personality, render it an effective spiritual instrument through purification, through undertaking spiritual disciplines, the soul can effectively extract us from material entrenchment and use us as it sees fit in terms of its development and the demands of evolution. So, yeah, I mean, these two labors I've mentioned fit really well, actually, the symbolism with the astrology. The zodiac, it can be helpful to understand it, to actually view it as an idea that begins in Aries, is consolidated in Taurus, explored further in Gemini, nurtured in Cancer, expressed creatively in Leo, analyzed and criticized in Virgo so it can be improved. Then it is taken to the world. It is compared against, its effectiveness is compared with what is going on in the world in Libra. It then is taken to the depths in Scorpio as a means of improving the idea. In Sagittarius, it is focused in a way that it can achieve as much as it's capable of doing. Sagittarius is all about aspiration and aiming for a high point. And then in Capricorn, the idea is realized. That's the pinnacle. Then in Aquarius, it should be given out for the benefits of the collective. And then sacrificed in Pisces, ready for the beginning of the new cycle in Aries. I'm just trying to throw a little bit of light on astrology there. But if we proceed to the third labor, where Hercules has to acquire the golden apples of the Hesperides, this relates to Gemini. In esoteric astrology, it's ruled by Venus, and Venus rules illumination. And these apples, which Hercules must acquire, they symbolize the fruits of the soul, the energies of the planes of consciousness where the soul resides, what we call Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, divine will, love, wisdom, and the ability to think abstractly. And Gemini is about duality, and the spiritual aspirant must create unity out of duality, must fuse soul and personality. So Hercules has to find this sacred tree, and he encounters Nereus, who is a shape-shifting god, and he holds him down in the water. Nereus keeps changing shape. He's got Nereus because he can tell him where the sacred tree is, and eventually he does. Nereus is another symbol of the mind, shape-shifting, keeps changing. And when we are able to still the mind, we receive energies from above, from the soul, and this precipitation gives him the insight. Hercules must perform a great act of service in this labor. Service is always important on the path. And he relieves the Titan Atlas of his burden of supporting the world on his shoulders, just temporarily, while Atlas collects the apples for him. Hercules has slain this monster called Ladon that Atlas is afraid of. This is supporting the world on one's shoulders is a very strong symbol of service and taking on planetary karma. Atlas actually wants to leave Hercules holding up the world, but Hercules outsmarts him and says he has to adjust his cloak and asks Atlas to take the world for what Atlas believes in a short period. Then Hercules walks off with the apples.
Nasty piece
smart guy, yeah. But it's a wonderful labor, and these in terms of its symbolism, these three golden apples, the fruits of the soul, guarded by maidens. And Hercules, first of all, has to find out where they are through taming this shapeshifter, which, of course, is the mind. It's only by stilling the mind and looking within that we become aware of the higher realities. So that's Gemini. In labor 4, Cancer, he has to capture the Ceryneian hind. This is a gentle, elusive creature that resides within a forest. The forest is a symbol for the unconscious. When you come across symbols like the forest, the sea, etc., they're symbols of the unconscious. And the hind is symbolic of the intuition, which is a faculty related to the soul. And this one is a real challenge. It takes Hercules a year before he spies the hind and is able to fire an arrow and pin its legs together. A year is a symbol of an entire cycle. It could relate actually to a lifetime, an incarnation. But the hind is gentle, innocent, graceful, elusive. And of course, we must express grace, gentleness, and spiritual innocence of the heart chakra if we are to access our intuition. Cancer is the sign which rules subjective matters like dreams and meditations, but it also rules Maya and delusion. So we have to elevate our consciousness if we are going to overcome this.
Right, so that's a link to Cancer then, the hind.
Yeah, the hind is sacred to the goddess Artemis, the Greek Artemis, the Roman Diana, who's the goddess of the forest, symbol of the unconscious. When Hercules takes a hind to King Eurystheus, he tries to claim it, but the goddess says no way, because that's symbolic of the fact that if we function simply as a personality, we can't have control of these higher faculties. We have to become the hero and tread the path if we're going to do that. So that's the Cancer one. The next labor is Leo. Surprise, surprise, the Nemean lion. There's this lion that's creating havoc, running around the countryside, terrifying everyone. The lion is symbolic of a personality that is not under control of the soul. And of course, these people in the outer world are legion. And Hercules chases the lion into a cave. He finds there are two entrances, but he seals one off, then goes into the cave, chases it back into the cave, and chokes the life out of the lion with his bare hands. The cave is a symbol for the subjective realms of the psyche, the lion of the personality that is not harnessed to the soul. And the fact that this happens within a cave symbolizes that spiritual transformation occurs within the subjective realms of the psyche. Interestingly, after he overcomes the lion, he wears its cloak as a symbol of his courage. And similarly, when we tread the path, we are seeking to render our personality as a cloak for the soul. So Leo, for one treading the path, Leo should function like a miniature sun. One should radiate energy and light to all around. This can be through creativity, through rulership, or any display of what we call wholeness, or what Jung called wholeness, which is related to the heart chakra. Leo, of course, rules royalty, and in Egypt, the pharaoh was considered divine. You had Akhenaten, who instigated sun worship and was depicted as a sphinx. But the Nemean lion then is that's the challenge of Leo. Anyone incarnated in Leo is who's wanting to tread the path. It's all about getting the ego out of the way. You should still be at the center of things, radiating love and light to others, but not being egotistical about it.
Right, a fine line.
I always feel that Leos, particularly Leo rising, the rising sign being particularly related to soul expression, do tread that fine line. They are at the heart of things. They're radiating love. They're assisting others. They're like a lion with a pack of cubs. But sometimes the ego can take over. I have a moon in Leo. I was an only child, so I can identify with that. I'm probably the exact opposite now. I'm older, but I can identify with that archetype, certainly, the Leo one, and the need to display oneself.
Wow. Yeah.
So in Labor 6, this related to Virgo. Hercules
are you a Virgo? Are you Virgo or Libra, Matt?
I am Libra.
Libra, right.
Yeah.
Well, listen out for Libra.
Oh, we're getting close to Libra then. So Labor 6, Virgo, he has to acquire the girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of a tribe of female warriors. Virgo spiritually is all about service. We say service without seeking reward or recognition, and maintaining one's spiritual purity regardless of what's happening in one's surroundings. Now, the symbol of the girdle, it's placed around the middle of the female body. Well, I suppose it can be placed around the male body as well. But in terms of the symbolism here, the female body, this is the area related to fertilization, where embryogenesis, fetal development occur prior to birth. And this is all about what we would call the Christ child within, giving birth to the Christ child. Of course, we have Mary and Jesus. We have Maya Devi and Siddhartha, who went on to become the Buddha. So Hippolyta's girdle represents understanding the relationship between spirit and matter, and using this understanding to benefit humanity. Now, there's a partial failure in this labor because Hippolyta goes to give the girdle to Hercules, but he ends up killing her because Hera has been at work stirring up a bit of trouble. So there's a partial failure, but Hercules redeems himself, or partially, I should say, because he rescues the maiden Hesione from a sea monster. This is a symbol of the Jungian anima, the aspect of, well, it's an aspect of the soul within the male psyche, or the symbol of the soul.
Yeah.
He descends into the belly of this monster to bring out Hesione.
Like
Joseph
Jonah.
Campbell. Yeah, well, you've anticipated me. That Joseph Campbell used to talk about the symbolism of the Jonah story with the whale descending into the depths, a form of self-annihilation, so that metamorphosis can occur.
Jordan Peterson as well. He's been talking recently a lot about Jonah and the whale, and this sort of. He's a big Jungian nerd as well.
He is indeed, yes. I'm a big fan of Jung. I've been very impressed with Jordan Peterson's work in that particular area. I mean, I'd have to say my Greek hero myth book, this one, plug. No, but it takes quite a Jungian approach. The Herculean Labours are considered more from a Jungian approach than from Bailey's approach. But I like to think it's a synthesis of the two. But Joseph Campbell as well, he was very heavily influenced by Carl Jung. So the Libra one then...
the best one.
Now, this is the capture of the Erymanthian boar. I don't find
Boring.
This one... I don't find this particularly...
Yeah, just skip this one, Gary. We're not
Libra,
interested, are we, Matt? We're not interested in Libras. Nah.
Libras are the best. There's another Matt in the chat as well, who's a Libra.
All right, if we must then, Gary.
Yeah.
Libra is a sign of balance and spirit. It's about balancing spirit and form as we build a bridge to the soul. Libra rules bridges. We call that bridge the Antakarana, or rainbow bridge, and this is achieved through meditation. And Libra rules partners, and Libras tend to do well in one-to-one situations. But spiritually, the challenge for Libra is to realize who the true partner is, the soul or higher self. So the boar is a symbol of desire, and Hercules chases it up to the high mountains. High mountains, areas where illumination can occur. We have a better view of things, a clearer view of things from a mountaintop. So he overcomes the boar on the mountaintop. He chains it and drives it down the mountain. So in Libra, the initiate here, spiritual initiate, is demonstrating that the lower nature has been overcome and tamed, and he follows a straight path down the mountain, symbolizing the balance between the higher and lower natures. And this then offers one the capacity to unlock life's mysteries. Actually, in terms of Libra, another one I like, resolving opposites, in the myth of Jason, when he has to sail through the clashing rocks, the Symplegades, they symbolize the opposites of manifestation. And he is able, with the assistance of a dove, which is actually sacred to Venus, the traditional ruler of Libra, he's able to pass through the clashing rocks in his ship, the Argo, and then the rocks stop clashing. I think that's a nice symbol, actually. It's kind of Libra and Gemini. But that is the Erymanthian boar, which doesn't have an outstanding correlation to Libra, but there are elements that fit. Labor 8 fits very well with Scorpio. That's overcoming the Linnaean Hydra. The Hydra resides within a swamp, what we would call the lower unconscious. It appears to be conceived from the foulest thoughts that humanity can conceive of. And there's two versions of how Hercules overcomes it. In one version, he's cutting, well, it has 9 heads. One is immortal and the other 8 are not. But whenever one of the 8 are cut off, 2 more come up. And this is symbolic of the fact that we can't take on our lower nature on its own terms, and we can't repress things. They just come back twice as strong. But Hercules, in one version, sinks to his knees as a symbol of humility. He grabs the Hydra and holds it up to the sunlight, i.e., holding our personality up to the light of the soul. And in doing this, the Hydra withers away, and Hercules takes the immortal head and buries it under a rock. There's another version where he cuts off each of the 8 mortal heads, and his nephew Iolaus then cauterizes the heads with a burning stake. That emphasizes force of will to overcome the lower nature. Again, the Hydra's head is buried under a rock. This symbolism of the Hydra's immortal head under the rock indicates that the forces of the lower astral plane are always around. It's just by purity of vibration that we become impervious to them. We effectively bury them under a rock through our spiritual practices. But that is a classic Scorpio myth.
And if anyone's wondering, like, because you said just at the beginning of that, Scorpio is linked to the task of the Hydra. You just look at the constellation of Scorpio, and it looks more like a Hydra than a scorpion.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sharing that, Phil. That's nice.
I had to check just to be sure, because there is a constellation, the Hydra, as well, but that doesn't look as that. The Scorpio looks more than a Hydra, than the Hydra constellation looks like a Hydra.
Yeah.
It's really amazing the knowledge that the ancients had. I think there's a lot more to be revealed. And interestingly, in the Hercules Labours, there were initially 10 and they were increased to 12. And that's because in the Scorpio one, because his nephew assists him, Eurystheus said, "Oh, you haven't done that one properly." And also in the cleansing of the Aegean stables, Aquarius, which we're going to come to, when he knocks down the walls of the stables and diverts rivers to cleanse them of the cattle dung, Eurystheus says he's succeeded by trickery, so he gave him another one. But one of my learned friends pointed out, after I'd finished my book, that the Greeks originally had 10 constellations, which were then increased to 12, which is absolutely fascinating.
Really?
Of course.
So when was that? When was that changed? Then do we know when they moved from 10 to 12?
I would have to check the book. I actually have a copy of the book. Manly Palmer Hall mentions it in his Secret Teachings of All Ages.
Right. I'm guessing it was in the archaic period. I'm guessing it wasn't like in the 1920s.
Yeah. Again, to digress slightly, a materialist would say, well, this astrology is rubbish. The signs aren't all the same size. People are now talking about a 13th. But my spiritual mentor, Douglas Baker, he said astrological energies come about through humanity effectively projecting archetypal qualities onto each of them. And therefore, there's this relationship between humanity and the zodiac. We're part of a living universe. That should be remembered. And when we have these particular thoughts, etc., we create energy reservoirs. And of course, these astrological ones are immense. And as we evolve, the archetypes will evolve. Right. You could say, as we evolve, the gods evolve, because the gods are representations of archetypes.
That's a great way to think about it, that we're sort of projecting with our psyche, through these archetypes. We're seeing what we see in the sky and then projecting ourselves rather than the reverse. I think a lot of people look at astrology when they first come to it and they think it's the reverse, that all the stars are controlling you, but maybe it's more that us as a whole are imprinting or projecting onto the sky.
And we're looking at well, we live within the body of a greater being. We're effectively looking at the universal physiology, and we are as cells within this. But there is a relationship between us and the greater lives which we are a part of, and that's important to bear in mind. Immense lives are operating through these zodiacal constellations, just as we operate through our physical body, and the solar consciousness operates through the solar system, and so on. Astrology is essentially a study of the physiology of the universe from an esoteric point of view.
Cool.
Now, the Sagittarius labor, another somewhat tenuous one, Hercules has to flush these ferocious birds out of a marsh, the Stymphalian birds, they're called. And Athena, gifts of the goddess, gives him a rattle. He climbs onto the slope of the surrounding Mount Silene and shakes a rattle like an old-fashioned football fan. And the sound of the rattle causes the birds to come out of the swamp, and he destroys them with his arrows.
Right.
So I take the going up the mountain, shaking a rattle, elevating one's consciousness, and the vibrations of the soul are too much for what is in the lower unconscious to deal with. So it's effectively flushed out, and then the Sagittarian arrows of aspiration kill the birds. It's this labor to me is about spiritual cleansing, and Sagittarius is the archer. He's firing these arrows of aspiration, but Sagittarius is also half man, half horse, and the lower nature must be dealt with. We always say there are practical lessons to be learned in Sagittarius before one becomes whole. There's a blending of the higher and lower aspects of humanity. Sagittarius is the sign of alchemy, where the human personality, symbolized as the base metal, is fashioned into the immortal, eternal, incorruptible gold.
Right.
And the Stymphalian birds, as I say, negative thoughts, desires, and so on, and these must be forced out.
I mean, just looking
So
at it,
late,
because you mentioned it was shooting down the birds. And
yeah.
when you look at, I'm just looking at if a picture of the northern sky, and where Sagittarius is sort of rising above the horizon, you've got Aquila and another bird constellation that name escapes, Cygnus, Aquila and Cygnus, sort of directly above in some situations. So I wonder if that's
Look,
been incorporated.
I love what you're doing here, Phil, because when you study myth, that's how you do. You ask yourself what the symbols mean to you, and you make associations.
Right.
That is how the higher abstract mind works. It's beyond the intellect. I mean, it might sound like schizophrenia to a materialist, but that's basically how it works.
Yeah.
We ponder over these things. We make associations. Same when we look at tarot cards. Symbolic of well, you have the fool's journey in the tarot, and you can look at the symbolism of the cards and affect certain realizations. But I always emphasize it's what the symbols mean to you as an individual, and that meaning will change. And similarly, those symbols would have meant different things to the Greeks, to us, because, well, we have the benefit of modern psychology.
Right. Yeah.
But of course, we can never be definitive about myth. Myth shouldn't function as dogma. There's no definitive answer, because the universe is in a state of flux, and generations that succeed us will affect different interpretations, because the world will have changed. AI is here now, but we're going to become a hell of a lot more advanced. We're going to have a metaverse and so on. But the symbolism of the myth, the archetypes that the myth represent, will not go. The archetypes will just be expressed in different ways.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. They'll adapt, or
I like
we'll
that.
adapt them.
So Labor 10 Capricorn, he has to descend into the hell worlds to overcome the three-headed monster dog Cerberus.
Right.
Cerberus is a symbol for what the wisdom teachings call the dweller on the threshold. The Hydra is too, but the Cerberus one is the final confrontation. The dweller is the sum total of the personality attributes that have accumulated over our many previous lives. And the dweller on the threshold blocks the threshold of initiation into higher states of consciousness. And Capricorn is a sign of spiritual initiation, but it rules burdens, difficulties, long-standing karma, but also responsibility, patience, endurance. And these are all relevant to the Capricorn archetype and to the spiritual initiates. And in this labor, he descends into the realm of Hades, or the Roman Pluto, and Hades asks Hercules what he's doing within his realm, and Hercules says, "I'm here to overcome Cerberus." So Hades says, "Well, on you go. Take him on with your bare hands," which he actually does. And of course, this three-headed monster dog. Whenever when we're seeking to fulfill a quest, I'm talking generally, not just spiritually, that monster dog is everything within our psyche that could hold us back, or this is too damn difficult, or I'm not feeling that well, I'm bored, and so on, or what are other people going to think of me, and so on, and Hercules just drags Cerberus out of hell and takes him to Eurystheus, who pleads with him to take him straight back down there. So that's the overcoming of the hellhound, the spiritual initiation.
Right.
Then in the 11th labor, which
Can I just sorry, Gary, can I just interject there on the 10th?
Of course you can.
You mentioned that it was represented a doorway, and I just had a thought from a more prosaic point of view that Capricorn's the end of the year, isn't it? And you have this end of one year and the start of another. It's like a gateway to another year. And also,
it is, yeah.
And also, the three-headed dog, Harry Potter fans. So in Harry Potter, I think it's the Chamber of Secrets, there's a three-headed dog called Fluffy, who guards the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets for Hagrid.
Yes.
So J.K. Rowling was she's a bit of an esotericist on the quiet, I think.
Yeah,
she is.
Yeah, I think a closet one. Yeah.
Sorry, so go on.
C.S. Lewis as well. If you watch the Narnia, read the Narnia books, or watch the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. What an amazing symbolic depiction of the spiritual path. Absolutely incredible. I always wonder if the actors and actresses in that film realize how profound that symbolism is. Absolutely incredible.
I doubt it. So sorry, I interrupted you. You were going on to number 11.
He has to cleanse the Aegean stables. These stables, King Aegeus keeps these stables that are filled with cattle dung, and Hercules has to cleanse them within a day. And what he does, he sees there are two rivers flowing nearby, so he creates holes in the stable walls and diverts the course of the rivers. Sounds like an easy thing to do. And then the rivers wash out all the dung. So Bailey relates the dung to all the negative thoughts and actions of humanity. But on an individual level, it's about the waters of knowledge, or the waters of the soul, cleansing out all the dross and negativity within the psyche, cleansing of the lower unconscious. Because these royal stables have never been cleaned, so there's a foul stench pervading the entire land, and crops cannot grow as a result. But Aegeus had promised Hercules a tenth of his cattle if he could succeed. But he then reneges on that because he states that Hercules has succeeded by trickery and banishes him from the land. But that banishing from the land, that's symbolic of the fact that people with a materialistic perspective are never aware of the work of the spiritual initiate. They're not aware of higher things. It's interesting, this cleansing of the land, because it makes me think of the Grail legends, because the maimed king or the Fisher King has to be healed so the wasteland can be redeemed.
Right,
I
that's
mean, the
the
Grail
start.
legend.
So that's like the start of the reason for the quest, isn't it? Is that the land has been turned to blight and the sun cannot be seen and the crops aren't growing.
I mean, basically, that's spirit coming into matter. You know, in the Grail legends, you have this wounded king who's our spiritual essence, but he can't express himself because the soul has to be developed. We have to display the qualities of the questing knight.
Right.
But, you know, whether you're looking at Parzival or you're looking at Galahad, which is more Christian mysticism, the Virgin Knight, who possesses great courage, honor, and virtue. But yeah, it's all about creating conditions where spirit can then realize its potential in matter. That's the redeeming of the wasteland, of course.
Can I just ask you something quick, just before we go off Arthur?
Yeah.
There's a story of, I think it's Parzival, who gets to the Grail Castle and he fails at the final hurdle because he doesn't ask the question. Are you familiar with this story?
Who does the Grail serve? Yeah.
Yeah. What's that telling us? That sort of reluctance to ask the question, do you think?
Well, I think at that stage he's simply not yet ready. You know, I think he's then got to go on and undertake these various adventures. He meets the hideous Grail maiden, Kundry, in the Wolfram version,
Right.
who's in some ways she's like Medusa in that to get to the light, you have to go through the darkness, and we have to look at the darkness within ourselves and all the ugly aspects within us before we can then access the spiritual. In the Medusa myth, of course, when she is decapitated, Pegasus emerges, and Perseus can then ascend to the Olympian heights. And similarly, when Parzival is able to relate to Kundry, etc., he finds his way to the Grail, and the Fisher King is healed, etc.
Okay, jolly good. Now we've saved the best one till last, haven't we, Pisces?
This one doesn't have a particularly strong relationship to Pisces. It's a cattle of Geryon, the three-headed monster. Now, in this particular labor, Hercules must take these cattle and take them across the land. Alice Bailey saw the cattle as symbolizing the lower natures of humanity, and Hercules functioning like a Christ-like figure in overcoming these and controlling these. And this labor is related to a great act of sacrifice. In this labor, you have Hera creating problems in terms of Hercules getting the cattle to his destination. He's tested. He has to overcome cattle guardians, a shepherd and a two-headed dog who is related to Cerberus. Then the monster Geryon attacks Hercules, but he overcomes the monster. Pisces rules the depths of the psyche right enough. My mentor, Douglas Baker, would say, when Pisces is rising in the chart, the ascendant, the Pisces individual has to go through hell to achieve their paradise, because Pisces rules the heights and the depths, basically. But Alice Bailey she's looking at those labors as the soul's final round on the zodiac, what we call the progression around the cardinal cross. Whereas you can look at the labors simply anyone can look at them in terms of the astrology or in terms of psychological challenges that they face. They can look at them obviously the inner and the outer are connected. Some of these characters that Hercules is facing, we might find them at work, for example, a boss at work, or somebody who's difficult, perhaps someone in the family. It's amazing the way these challenges come to meet us. And of course, treading the spiritual path, it's not necessarily glamorous. It's the difficult lessons, the challenges that enable us to grow. But Alice Bailey then said Hercules was elevated to the stars. There's also an important aspect of the Hercules myth where he frees Prometheus. And Prometheus is a symbol for humanity. He tricks Zeus with the cattle and the bones, giving food to the gods, because previously the gods and humanity have ate together. That's prior to the fall, the Christian fall. Humanity comes into matter, and Prometheus tricks Zeus with this cattle. He offers Zeus a choice between two piles of the animal, and Hercules has disguised the animal's bones with fat, and Zeus chooses the wrong one. So later, however, Prometheus is able to steal fire from the gods, but then he's chained to a rock in the Caucasus where a vulture picks at his liver during the day. So Prometheus is a symbol for humanity coming down to matter, and the vulture is a symbol for the five senses and the spiritually excruciating effect they have on one who is driven by their desires. And we must effectively evoke our Hercules to free our Prometheus, so to speak. And then we can access the fire of the gods.
Wow, the eternal flame, guarded by, the Vestal Virgins and whoever else throughout history.
Well, this is it. Yeah, I mean, fire is a symbol of transformation, and our universe in esoteric writings is described as a sea of fire. There's a famous Bailey book, a very abstract one called The Treatise on Cosmic Fire, probably one of the most important esoteric books ever written. So that's a sort of potted version of the Hercules or Heracles myth in terms of the 12 Labours.
That's fantastic. Gary, one thing that strikes me about these Greek heroes like Heracles and Perseus, for example, which I think is relevant, is that they all have, they're all sort of semi-divine or demigods. They have like a material, physical persona plus a divine or higher self.
It's very common in Greek myth for the hero to have a mortal mother and either a divine father, usually Zeus, or to be of divine lineage. And that's symbolic of our essential duality of spirit and matter. And we must resolve these through the conjunctio of the alchemists, the individuation of Jung, the initiation of the wisdom teachings. I'm really pleased you mentioned that. I ought to have mentioned that. You're right, because like in the Perseus myth, Zeus is his father, as he is Heracles. Theseus is fathered by Poseidon. We find this is very common.
Yeah. So do we know how far back this myth goes? I mean, is there like an earliest written record from like Hesiod or Homer or someone?
You're testing me, but I think we're going back to maybe 500-600 BC. But of course, was there a character before an actual Hercules? Usually there's an interaction between events and archetypes. I mean, right. You could look at Jesus Christ rather in this way.
Another semi-divine, mortal, but with a divine nature.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just wonder, you mentioned that there might be something based in, like a real, almost an historical Hercules. Because, I mean, I was thinking going back to, like, some of the early Greek stuff. Alexander the Great, like his parents, they claimed genealogy from, I think his mother claimed to be a descendant of Achilles. And it's pretty secure now that the Trojan War did happen about 12,000 BC, and there could well have been someone called Achilles, you know, fighting there.
Yeah.
So it just makes you wonder if there was actually a Hercules somewhere back in the midst beyond the historical veil. And now we're talking about him 3,000 years later. I don't know. What's the
well, it's been a pleasure going through this with you lads, and thanks very much for inviting me.
It's been fab, yeah. We've just rocked up past an hour. People in the chat have been saying they've learnt loads.
Yeah.
They've learnt loads of stuff.
Oh, well, that's brilliant.
You're really
my
packed in.
book's available, DouglasBakerBooks.com.
Oh, right. DouglasBakerBooks.com. Can you send me the link? I've got your website up.
I'll put a link in the chat, actually.
Yeah.
That would be the best way. I'll make you laugh. I used to have it on my astrology website, but because I don't have e-commerce, I had different options for people buying the book either here or abroad.
Right.
And I was finding that people kept getting it wrong, you know, paying for the wrong one.
Right.
So I ended up giving up. But I'm just going to go to it. Here it is here. Let me just go back and put this in the chat.
What is it? Douglas Baker, was it?
DouglasBakerBooks.com. It's in the chat now, Phil. So if you want to pass that on to any interested parties.
Claregate Books, is that it?
I'm just looking. It's just Douglas Baker. There's a separate Claregate site.
Oh, I can find it.
DouglasBakerBooks.com.
Yes, I've got it. I'll put a link in the description and in the show notes for anyone who wants to follow up, because I did put your website in, because I mean that's another for people who want to contact you regarding astrology and birth charts and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The website's there in the show notes if you want to do that, and I'll put a link in the show notes for the bookshop as well. Wonderful. Well, this has been great, Gary. You packed in a ton of information in there. And
I tried to, you know, give potted versions and cover as much as I could. So I hope everyone's enjoyed it.
I'm sure they have. Stay on the line for us for 1 minute, Gary, while we play ourselves out. And the rest of you out there in YouTube land will be back very shortly for some news in part 2 and some housekeeping. Okay. Take care. See you soon, guys.